an invitation.
Out in the back seat of my 60 Chevy, working on mysteries without any clues.
Building a mystery.
Hello and welcome to Mystery Monday number 12, where we work on making inferences. So the official learning goal is to cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support an analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text, including where the text leaves matters uncertain. You'll be asked at the end to rate yourself on a scale of 1 through 4 on your ability to draw inferences from the text. If you're at a 4, that means that you can draw inferences from the text, use the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, and identify where the text leaves matters uncertain. You're also picking up on nuance, like sarcasm and irony. If you're at a 3, which is where we want everybody, if you're at a 4, great, but we'd like everybody to get to a 3 at some point. It's okay if you're not, but this is where we'd like you to be toward the end of the year here. That means that you can draw inferences from the text by using the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, and you can identify where the text leaves matters uncertain. You don't have to be necessarily hitting that nuance like sarcasm and irony, but definitely where the text leaves matters uncertain. If you're at a 2, that means you can draw inferences from the text by using the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point. And if you're at a 1, that means you are unsure of how to draw inferences. Hello and welcome to Mystery Monday number 13. Here we go. Should the third secretary sign? Had she been more of a feminist, Ina Malor would have likely raised Cain, or at least been resentful over the fact that last spring's round of promotions had gone exclusively to men. But she wasn't particularly intense about her feminism, nor was she the type to hold a grudge. Besides, she'd gotten a bit of a prize in any case. Her rank may have continued to be third secretary, which she'd been for the last 2 years, but now she was the third secretary at the embassy in Vienna instead of in Cairo. For Ina, the transfer meant an apartment in which the plumbing worked as a rule and not an exception. There was no backsheesh to pay every time she needed anything done. She could picnic in the grounds of the Schönbrunn Palace with no beggars playing on her guilt. There were concerts. Oh, were there concerts? Mozart, Beethoven, Mahler, and museums, and churches, and history. Ina knew that if she had pushed hard last spring, she might have become a second secretary. But in Kathmandu, hard to get schnitzel in Kathmandu. No, third secretary in Vienna was definitely a better deal. Admittedly, the Soviets had messed up her pleasure temporarily when the tanks rolled into Prague last month and forced Alexander Dubček and the Czech government to accept normalization. A flood of refugees had spilled into Austria. Most of them ended up in the Trachtenskirchen camp. Among other things, the location of the camp interrupted Ina's now thoroughly established habit of lunching at one of the street cafes in St. Stephen's Square. Still, Trachtenskirchen wasn't all that bad, for it was set in a vineyard near the city. What bothered Ina a lot more was making decisions that deeply affected the lives of the refugees. Her signature at the bottom of a single document could mean freedom for a refugee. Without her signature, the applicant could well be sent back to the repression behind the Iron Curtain. It was a power that made Ina Malor extremely uncomfortable. Well over half of the refugees had no papers, for they'd fled that night of August 21st with only the clothes on their backs. Ina often had to rule on the truth of an applicant's identity on the basis of a driver's license or a photograph or a work card. Yesterday, the only proof one refugee could offer was the few koruni in her purse. The man who sat before her now offered her a first, however. He had no passport. Nothing unusual about that for someone from behind the Iron Curtain. No driver's license, no work card. In fact, nothing but a very worn and creased photograph. Nevertheless, it was a photograph that certainly suggested his life would be in danger if he returned to Czechoslovakia. The police officials there knew that he was coming. The picture had been taken in Moscow. Even without Ina's experience in foreign affairs, she would have recognized Red Square and the Lenin Mausoleum. It took a magnifying glass, however, to see the man in front of the mausoleum was also the man sitting nervously on the other side of her desk. The same glass showed very clearly that he was vandalizing one of the USSR's most important monuments by painting over Lenin's name. Most notably was that the L had been changed to a box, and now the I had been altered to resemble Byzantine cross. How he had accomplished this in the middle of the Red Square with all the guards about was incomprehensible to Ina. But it was a crime that, if he'd been caught, would have meant a long stretch in a gulag. Still, how he'd done it was not Ina's problem. Her problem was whether or not to sign his application. Should Ina Malor sign the application? Why or why not?
Alright, so here's what we know. Well, you might not know, but that's what I'm here to talk about with you. The Russian alphabet is different than our modern alphabet. If you take a look here, in the upper right, in the top row, second from the end, is the I. It looks a lot different than our I. It looks like two backward ends almost. And if you go down to the next row, second from the left, the L, right next to the K there, looks much different than our L. Now he was spray painting the word Lenin. And so if we take a look here, should the third secretary sign? Probably not, for the photograph is fraudulent. Russia uses the Cyrillic alphabet in which the letters of Lenin's name, most particularly the L and the I, bear no resemblance at all to those letters that, as we know them in the modern Roman alphabet. The Cyrillic alphabet, modified from Greek by St. Cyril, is used for Slavic languages like Russian and Bulgarian. As third secretary, Ina would surely have known that and likely would have declined to sign. When the USSR moved to Czechoslovakia on August 21st, 1968, Austria became the first stop for most refugees. Lenin died in 1924. In 1930, his tomb was built in Red Square, with his embalmed body visible behind the glass. It became a type of shrine in Moscow, but was removed after perestroika. Now, I don't expect you to necessarily know that information. That's kind of odd information that you might know, trivia-like, maybe like a trivia game type information. However, at this point, you do now know, and I'm looking for you to be able to make those inferences that I ask in that puzzle video, and be able to come to that conclusion as to whether or not that third secretary should have signed. With that, I think my time is complete, and ciao for now.